Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Shaun.
I write about AI news here at Tech Target.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk to tech experts about everything AI, from open and closed models to AI agents and who's ahead in the generative AI race.
And even the elusive AGI.
We've got it covered, right, Shaun?
Yep, we've got it covered.
Hi, everyone. We're back with another Targeting AI podcast from Informer Tech Target. This is a special episode for us because it reunites us with our first guest when we started this podcast 2 years ago in July 2023. He is Michael Bennett, Associate Vice Chancellor for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Strategy. We couldn't think of a better guest to talk about all the different and amazing developments in AI, mostly generative and agentic AI over those 2 years. Michael is uniquely qualified to comment on the most pressing issues facing the AI community. He's a lawyer, university educator, deep thinker about AI legal and ethical matters, and artistic applications of AI technology. We've come such a long way since we had Michael on 2 years ago, with more than 50 episodes published on major podcast platforms. We also moved into the video realm in 2024, and now you can watch our pod on Informer Tech Target's YouTube channel, Eye on Tech. Michael, thank you so much for joining our 2-year anniversary episode. We are so glad to have you back.
Welcome back, Michael. What's the single biggest development you've seen in AI since OpenAI released ChatGPT in November 2022? We know you've been watching this stuff closely.
We are coming up to, rapidly approaching the third anniversary of the arrival of ChatGPT. We hit November of this year. We've arrived at that point. And I think one of the most noteworthy impacts of the arrival of the technology is the public awareness of it. It's striking when you think about it. Every day since that initial arrival of the ChatGPT, the earliest version of it that was made available to the public, at least, every day since then, virtually, we've had public conversations. Media has been falling all over itself to understand the technology, to help the public come to grips with what it means for them in terms of, for us rather, in terms of work, life, investment, knowledge production. And that's been a continuous conversation for 2.5 years now. It's a striking development when you think about it. I'm not sure that there's been another technological innovation that is so singularly focused the public's imagination around implications.
What would you say about the Gen AI technology what about Gen AI technology seems to have made its evolution so startling and rapid in the past 2.5 years?
I think at least a couple of things have to be a part of that answer, Esther. One is that the technology for many people seems shocking in its capacity to mimic human understanding and human intelligence. Everyone that's engaged with this technology has come away with at least a modicum of a sense that it is light years ahead of many types of artificial intelligence that they may have been involved with before ChatGPT's arrival. And the technology as well, this is the second part of the answer, the technology as well rides on a large foundation of pop cultural images and stories, right? So I think it's impossible to understand the way that publics around the world have engaged with, embraced with, as well as criticized the technology without taking into consideration that there's been a profound, you could almost call it pop cultural education. We've got, by my measure, perhaps nearly a century's worth of science fictional and speculative stories about what artificial intelligence means and what it will enable humanity to do, and what threats and some virtues it brings to the table as well. And so the reality of the technology is is more modest than the science fictional depictions of it. But I think the two are integrated, right? They're intimately connected.
Yeah, HAL is probably not nearly as powerful from 2001 as a real uh, generative AI. Okay, so Michael, in terms of safe, reliable, ethical, and responsible AI, what, if any, progress have the generative AI creators made in eliminating algorithmic bias, LLM hallucinations, biased training sets over the last 2 years, let's say?
Right. I think that the advances on the responsible artificial intelligence front have been both impressive and modest. They're impressive in the sense that the technology's foundational architectures put severe limits on what is possible here. When you are training foundation models on a great fraction of the material that's available online, you're going to have a lot of crap going in, right? That input is going to be it's going to be in many instances unpleasant. It's going to be inhumane. It's going to be not useful for applications that, say, educators like myself are interested in, or my institution are interested in. Applications that scientists are interested in. There's not a preponderance of rational thought in material that's online that's obvious to an even casual observer. And so the effort to sift through that material in many instances before, during, and after training, it's admirable. So it's impressive in that kind of way. But by the same token, because so much of that material is problematic in those ways that I mentioned and many others, the efforts to actually train these models such that the outputs are 99.9% of the time sensible, rational, and not biased, it can only be so effective, right? The crap factor going in is so high that the crap factor of the outputs are almost bound to be problematic in some instances. So, given those two pieces of my answer, I think it's impressive that that many of us get, as often as we do, more or less rational, effective, useful responses from these generative AI systems.
That seems to me, though, replicates the old computer maxim, garbage in, garbage out. So has the industry not learned from that, or is it just the scale of these LLMs make the guy go so pronounced?
I think it's more the second option there than the first. The notion, the kind of fundamental concept underlying the technology here, neural networks, transformer technology, um, it relies upon massive amounts of data, right? So the more data that the developers and the large tech companies that employ them use to train these models, the more effective the models, more effective they will be in many instances. There seems to be some limits to this, but in general, I think that notion holds. And so it's kind of a non-starter if you want a broadly knowledgeable generative AI system. It's a kind of a non-starter if that's your goal to not go for maximum data in the training phase.
So we're kind of shifting gears now, and we're talking about something that is relevant. Returning to legal issues, there's a lot of copyrighted, lawsuits that have come about in the past since we've last spoken, Michael. And I spoke to you as of like May or even early June about this, and we have today, which is June 25. We're talking about Entropic. Obviously, the judge ruled in favor of them in their lawsuit. what is the common thread among all the various lawsuits that content creators and publishers have filed against the creators of this generative AI technology? And how strong is the fair use argument? And how do you see all these lawsuits playing out? I mean, we have the Anthropic ruling, which the judge says, okay, what they did is fair use. So can we expect the rest to play out the same way?
So the rulings are, as you clearly indicate, Esther, are huge and looming. It's a source of great uncertainty for the industry and for all the users. And one of the things that acts as a kind of golden thread running through so many of them, and there are more than 30 across, multiple countries, primarily the U.S., but also the U.K. One of the questions goes to exactly what you're pointing to here. Um, is fair use going to be fair use in its analog in the UK? That the law there is slightly different. It's like, are those defenses against copyright infringement going to be deemed applicable to the large technology companies that have trained their foundational models on data that they've acquired without permission and without compensation, almost exclusively without permission and almost exclusively without compensation? As to the question of whether fair use will be an effective defense, from my perspective, I think there's some really good arguments for it. You think about the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI, for example, and in that instance, the New York Times has been for a very long time producing content that is journalistic, reportage, right, factually based. These are stories about things that are happening in the world. I love that newspaper. I've been a paying subscriber for the great bulk of my adult life. But even so, my sense is that content was produced in large part to educate the public, to inform us so that we're able to make effective decisions about the way that our world works, so that we're able to hold our leaders accountable and what remains of our democratic society. And then you think about when you think about how that content was used to train the foundational model, the result of that training produces a technology that, by most accounts, did not exist before. A technology that is also uh, that is also applicable in ways that are well beyond, right, simple information, factual data about what happened in the world yesterday, last week, or 10 years ago. And so fair use, the doctrine of fair use as a defense to copyright infringement, is concerned with a range of factors, four of them to be precise. And in many instances, if the use leads to a new development that is transformative, right? That, in other words, that use of the copyrighted material winds up creating something that is far beyond or far different in comparison to the copyrighted material, then the doctrine will will shield the alleged infringer. And I think there's a strong case for that being the actual case here. Some of my colleagues and some of my dear friends disagree with me, but I'm not alone in thinking that.
So I wanted to know how you believe that whether the court rules in favor of fair use or not. I wanted to know if you think that the vendors will change the way that they create the AI systems.
It's possible that the ruling, even if it goes in favor of the large AI companies and developers, will nevertheless lead to some kind of modification in the way that those companies work. And I say that because fair use for intellectual property attorneys like myself, and for industry followers like everyone on the call and everyone probably listening to this podcast, um, fair use is a fascinating concept. And this fight over copyright feels like a very technical legal argument, something at the intersection of cutting edge technological development and super complicated intellectual property law concepts. For the creators and for large swaths of the observing public, as far as I can tell, those types of issues, that type of view is interesting, but this is really a question of morality more so than it is of technical questions, what it takes to build this kind of technology, and certainly more a moral question than it is one about the technicalities of intellectual property law. When someone has spent their life honing their skills and making a livelihood based on the creative expressions that they're able to generate that then go on to get copyright protection, oftentimes those individuals feel an intimate, some might say irrational, but still real connection to that work. And when that work is taken without permission and without compensation, rational arguments probably are not going to sway their sense of what is fair and what is not. And so given that, if I'm right about that perspective, those perspectives, then I think the ruling will be one thing, but the brands of those companies on the far side of that ruling and their sense of what it takes to maintain those brands and to have the public respect those companies, want to do business with them, want to embrace their products and services, that type of bifurcated sense here, right? Technical legal matters on the one hand, moral questions on the other, may very well lead those companies to change the way that they do business, change the way they engage with creatives, in large part to shield themselves from extra legal critiques of their behaviors.
Okay, so I just wanted to note before I ask my next question, though, that the judge in this Anthropic case that Esther is reporting on today did appear to say that while fair use is valid, they're probably guilty of piracy. Anthropic the judge held them responsible for what he said was piracy. You know, like so fair use, yes, but you can't like keep these things. You can't take and steal and take and keep this content.
For you, Michael, what would you say is that difference between not the difference between the two? What does that, I guess, put Entropic on the line for here? And does that mean that every judge can say, well, you guys can't say fair use, but you're stealing people's stuff? Because what's the difference between saying piracy and me saying, not fair use?
Yeah, what's the difference with piracy and copyright infringement?
Yeah.
So, piracy, probably I'm not a maritime law expert or scholar. My guess is that piracy may have a technical legal definition in that space, but in the context of copyright law, piracy effectively just means taking, right? It just means infringing copyright. It means taking someone's copyrighted material without their permission and without compensation. And so, effectively, if you are in the situation of an Anthropic or another one of these large AI companies that did take content without permission and without compensation, we can call that piracy. That takes you on to then the question of whether there are defenses to what you have done. And that's where the fair use defense comes in. And fair use, effectively, if you're leaning on fair use more often than not, you're effectively conceding that you have infringed copyright. You're conceding that you took without permission and without compensation copyrighted material. And that's why I say they're the technical questions and the legal questions on the one hand, and then there's the moral question. And I sense that the public, non-technical experts in large measure, non-legal experts in extra large measure, are going to glom on and have been glomming on more to the moral calculus than they have the technical and legal calculus. And so I'm not sure there's much juice to be extracted from a comparison between piracy and fair use on the one hand. Fair use as a defense to copyright infringement effectively follows not always, but more often than not, effectively follows a conceding of the fact, right, that one has infringed copyright, in this instance, pirated copyrighted material.
Okay, so I wanted to pick on a certain vendor and put you on the spot a little bit about Perplexity. Like, it's perplexing to me why everybody is suing or complaining about Perplexity, and they probably faced more cease and desists than anybody else. Why could that be? On the one hand, and also, what do you think of reports that Apple wants to acquire Perplexity, or at least form an alliance?
It's unclear to me why Perplexity would be effectively the redheaded stepchild of the copyright fights, the AI copyright fights, right? It's not clear to me. Sometimes in these types of situations where there are multiple alleged corporate infringers, legal experts, law firms, and sometimes the clients that come to them for service will target specific firms that seem, or companies, copyright infringers, in other words, that seem particularly susceptible, and perhaps that has something to do with it. As for why Apple might be interested in acquiring Perplexity, to the extent that Perplexity is taking a lot of potential fire here, they might be in another kind of susceptible situation, right? That would make them particularly open to being acquired by some measures the second or third most valuable company on the planet. And so this could be an incredible opportunity for a company like Apple to basically swoop in and be the knight in shining armor that acquires a company like that, and does so at from Apple's perspective at a considerable discount. This might be the effective equivalent of buying on the dip.
So you
Yeah.
and I spoke about when Apple released its research paper, The Illusion of Thinking, about whether it has merit or not, right? Why do you think that? And you mentioned obviously that basically two things can be true at once, right? You know, they could either be like behind, they could be behind, but they can also be right about it having merit. Can you expand on why we have to, I guess, pay attention to that report in terms of whether LLM reasoning models are not as advanced as we think it is, and why also we have to think about Apple's, I guess, position in AI?
LRMs, large reasoning models, hold a lot of promise. Many researchers feel like, to the extent that the research communities, the applied research communities, are able to get these versions of models to actually document the stages of their reasoning, to the extent that that is possible and achievable and actually achieved, so goes the efficacy of our efforts to hold these models accountable and to confirm that they are being effective and reasonable and logical in their reading. When you can actually see the tickets, right? When the system is saying, here is the first step of reasoning, here's the second, here's the third, ... here is the 1037. You can go back and check that reasoning and confirm with a relatively high level of confidence that the model is pursuing a logic chain that actually does make sense. And so that's great in theory. We are not there yet. The paper seems to suggest, strongly suggests, that LRMs and LLMs, once they cross over into a regime of problem complexity that is moderate to high, they fail to be very effective. It's almost going back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about the relevance of science fictional narratives and speculative stories about AI. It's almost like those models are behaving like the robot in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They just kind of give up and become depressed and can't go on anymore. It's just too much. And so this is fascinating, but at the same time, Esther, and this is going to the AN negative A, two things kind of pointing perhaps in slightly different directions, sometimes even in opposite directions. The other thing that we have to bear in mind is that this is structured. The study, the research is structured in a kind of strange way, right? So, as far as my reading goes, the research uses single models, presents them with puzzles, and has those models attempt to solve the puzzles. You get the results that I just described. In low level complexity situations, they do pretty decently, at least as well as a human. Once you get to moderate complexity, and certainly when you get to high, they effectively give up. They collapse. Um, one one of the things that you would wind up doing, though, if you were an institution, an organization, a high stakes business unit, or governmental unit, one of the things you would very likely be doing, though, is using multiple models. And so, to the extent that one model starts to fail or starts to output gibberish, one of the first things that you would want to set in place and set in motion is another model that checks on those outputs and either picks up the slack from that point or helps that first model as it's giving signs that it's starting to move into a regime that is difficult for it to perform in. If you've got well orchestrated multiple model systems, my bet is that you won't experience that type of reasoning collapse as quickly. And so the results of that study are useful in the sense that they confirm something that we ought to have guessed anyway, i.e., don't rely on a single model to do really complicated things for you and your organization. And it's pointing to research that I hope we will receive a paper on, and maybe it's out there already. I mean, the papers are flying out hot and heavy. I may have missed it, so I need to look for this. But I'm betting that the paper is not there that confirms the converse, that when you do use effectively a chorus or a congress of models to do complex reasoning and problem solving, that you have better results. My bet is that that paper is it's probably a Google paper now that I think about it, and maybe they'll be there already. But this, and I'll say this and stop on this answer. One of the things that we ought to take away from this paper as well, and say something similar about the recently published MIT paper, Your Brain on ChatGPT, is that these papers will get glommed onto in ways that are not commensurate with their significance as far as scientific publications go. So what would have been more useful in public and media discussions around the Apple paper would have been pointers to other papers that discuss what multiple model systems confronted with the same types of problems do, how they perform. That would have been very useful. With respect to the Apple paper that arrived a week or a week and a half ago in Your Brain on ChatGPT, that paper is not peer reviewed, right? That paper has not been through, before it was released, it had not been through the rigorous review by experts with incredible knowledge in the field. The authors apparently thought that their message was so urgent that they needed to release it in advance of peer review. as well, the number of research subjects in that experiment is something it's significantly less than 100. It's not a very large pool of individuals. And so with respect to that paper, and this is coming from someone who is rather neutral on the claims of all of these researchers, but also someone who is heavily invested in the principles of the scientific method. We need rigorous peer review of that paper. And we also need a much larger group of experimental subjects, something on the order of tens of thousands, if I bet.
I wanted to ask in that respect because you spoke about like respecting the scientific process. You work in a university setting. Do you then think that some of these research papers from vendors are a lot biased, the way same way Apple is biased? And also, can you speak to what you think of Apple's position in the Gen AI market?
With respect to the question of bias, Esther, this is concerns with bias are ought to be addressed by peer review, right? That's one of its main functions. That's what that first question there goes right to the core of why I am so invested in the core principles of classic core principles of the scientific method. And that's why a lot of researchers, most of them, the great preponderance of them, are also such fans. Bias gets burned away by that process, right? Bias is ferreted out when you have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of researchers with high levels of skill in the domain, looking at every aspect of that paper and pointing out every actual flaw and every potential flaw, as well as pointing to subsequent research that needs to happen. They're also, very importantly, when you have a peer review process, individuals and research teams of individuals are going to attempt to replicate the study, which is another way to check on it and to ferret out bias. And so it's absolutely crucial in that sense that the MIT paper, your brain and ChatGPT, receive a high level of scrutiny from experts. As an educator and as someone who's responsible for the AI policies of a large, public R1 university, I'm at the same time very much compelled to take even flawed studies quite seriously. When you look at the MIT paper, one of the immediate things that jumps up to me is a relatively high probability indicator that, to the extent that that individuals, be they student, staff, or faculty, rely upon generative AI systems to help them write essays or write reports, it's very likely that their understanding and their commitment to memory of that material will be, both of those things will be quite low. We certainly want to get some kind of confirmation here, but I think the likelihood of it rolls true. It seems likely. It also seems to me, unsurprising, because at a basic level, for some of the applications that many of us are putting generative AI to right now, the whole point is to offload cognitive lift. The whole point is to free up thinking so that one can think about other things. And so we shouldn't be surprised that if individuals use ChatGPT or some other system to help them write a report or an essay, that they're going to be less invested in it. They're going to recall less of what the essay says, and they're going to probably understand, unless they're an expert in the domain, they're probably going to understand less than they would had they written it without any assistance from these systems. And so those are indicators, right? They're not confirmed. The study is flawed in those ways that I mentioned, but as a academic administrator, as an educator, they seem to point in the direction that seems truthful to me, and so I think it's safe, at least from my perspective, to act on those indicators.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about do you see, I mean, some people see the world of AI, especially with these new infrastructure investments, like huge data centers, whether it's in Texas or the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE. And now you see infrastructure capacity for AI in like China, West Coast of the US, and maybe a little bit of the Middle East, and then very little in South America or Africa or other parts of Asia. So is it a world of AI haves and AI have nots? And so this disparity in the extent of AI infrastructure, is that going to have an effect in the future on communities around the world access to AI technology?
Once again, yet again, we're seeing that those that have get and those that don't. This seems to be another replay in technological form of what some sociologists call the Matthew effect. And as far as disparities that may flow from it, there are at least two that we ought to be paying close attention to, Shaun. I think the first you just articulated, to the extent that infrastructure footprint is within the bounds of a particular national jurisdiction, in all likelihood that national jurisdiction is going to be able to reap the bulk of the benefits from it in terms of employment, in terms of understanding its implications, in terms of kind of positive feedback loops from it, attracting companies that need to be closer to it, developing solutions to its negative impacts, and so forth. And at the same time, the second part of the disparity, at least in the shorter term, until we develop some kind of solution for the negative externalities of these systems, is that we know that the high energy requirements of this infrastructure will very likely lead to externalities like continued global warming that are borne disproportionately by poorer countries and countries that in many instances are not making the types of infrastructure investment that the countries like the US and China are. So not only do you have the likelihood that there will be the positive technological spillovers for the countries that make the investment in the infrastructure, and the negative ones for those that don't, you also have the broader sort of ecological implications of those investments. In that way, the infrastructure's positive yield will very likely and unfortunately be captured by those countries that make the investments, and its negative externalities will probably be absorbed by the countries that don't. Once again, Matthew effect at the geopolitical level.
So veering into a fun topic now. When you and I first spoke, I think we were talking about musicians and artists, and I don't know if you remember that. And so, has generative AI been bad or good for artists, or has it been a mix of both? For instance, we see like Will.i.am taking advantage of it and creating his own AI company. How can artists, whether in visual arts, music, or other performing arts, take advantage of generative AI?
I do remember that conversation. I do remember that early discussion. It was a great one, and I think we pointed at that time to the wide range of practices of artists, right? Just in the U.S. and even wider if we expand to the globe. And so, some artists are artists are taking a range of approaches, right? Some artists are embracing the technology and attempting to make their practice, especially to the extent that it's commercial, more efficient. This could mean folding generative AI into the operational level of their enterprise, their work. So they're billing more effectively, they're communicating more effectively and more widely and a bit more quickly. They are perhaps also developing professional development programs for themselves and saving money and perhaps getting better performance out of their practice in that. And as a result of that, you also though see many artists, and I think these tend to be the louder ones in my circles, who don't want anything to do with the technology, feel that the technology, when it comes into the core of their practice, is disingenuous, that it's not authentic, that it is an application of a technology that's built on the back of piracy. These are the types of things that you can hear from artists. If you sample randomly in the U.S. or around the world, publicly, we're certainly seeing major artists come into the space. Most recently, at least by my measure, we've seen a controversial move by the great producer Timbaland, and this has been an example of an effort, at least it seems to me, an effort by an artist of great renown and great respect and great skill, an effort to introduce AI into the core of his practice, producing beats, making songs, releasing them. Timbaland went a step further, and a company that he is at least a partial owner of signed, my understanding, signed an AI, attempted to sign an AI as an artist to it as a label, effectively. I'm not sure how that's even possible, given my understanding of contract law. That seems more like a publicity stunt than an actual legal fact or fait accompli. But nevertheless, the pushback on this has been profound, because not only is the signing of an AI artist super problematic to those artists in the music industry who feel like embracing AI at the core of their practice is something that ought not to be done, but there was also a very strong claim laid against Timbaland that he was stealing beats. Someone described it to me the other day as a kind of colonial approach to producing popular music, and that he was taking beats, the allegation goes, from lesser well-known producers and beat makers, and actually in real time online turning those beats into something else and releasing a song. He ultimately had to apologize for this, felt compelled to apologize for this. And so, we have a range of responses here, and I think it's going to be a case by case matter that artists will have to decide what they're comfortable with in terms of integrating the technology into the operational level of their work, what they're comfortable with in terms of using the technology to refine their skills, and also what they're comfortable with in terms of taking the technology and using it as the driver for the production of their work.
So just final question is, the hype cycle on Gen AI is hot. The hype cycle on agentic AI seems even hotter. What's real? What's hype? And also, would this lead to like AGI? Are we close to AGI, Michael?
So, going in reverse, I don't think we are close to AGI. None of the research that has been made public, none of the publicly available research results or applications that we are undertaking at our institutions or hear about, even the most advanced technological institutions taking, suggests that we are there, or that we are within, say, a year or two of it. Some of the critics, even critics internal to the industry, like Tim Kudru, who has an extensive and notorious place in the industry, some of those types of critics suggest that it will never happen, at least not in our lifetimes. I tend to be taking a risk management approach to this question. I recommend that others sample this perspective as well. Proceeding as if the probability of AGI arriving within the next 10 years, proceeding as if that is a very low probability outcome, but one that is not a zero probability outcome seems wisest to me. And so institutions, individuals certainly, but institutions and organizations should probably be thinking about what they would do, how they would proceed, how they would engage with AGI were it to become available within the next 10 years, but doing that with the understanding that the likelihood of that is at best a very low single digit percentage, perhaps even tenth of a percentage likelihood. The hype cycle, what's real right now is AI fluency. I think it's certainly for educational institutions like ours, like University of Illinois, Chicago. We need our students to understand, before they graduate, they need to understand the fundamentals of this technology, understand what the industry sectors that they're headed into, understand what those sectors are doing with the technology, and most importantly, understand the limitations of this technology, its implications for the way that we think, and what the fundamental responsible artificial intelligence application principles are around the technology. That's very hot right now. And I think that that's something that all organizations and all individuals need to be thinking about. It seems to me that what's cooling off in the hype cycle is the gargantuan amounts of investment across the board. I think that many companies now are looking for artificial intelligence, machine learning, versions of machine learning in particular, including large language models and large reasoning models, to show ROI at this point. The investment has been significant, and now we need to see the proof of the pudding.
Okay, well, Michael, thank you so much for helping us capping off our 2-year anniversary of the Targeting AI podcast. You're our favorite guest. Readers can connect with, and listeners can connect with Michael at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and with our podcast on the major pod platforms and our YouTube channel, Ion Tech. Thank you, and I hope we see you before the next 2 years.
we like our other guests too.
Fabulous. It was great talking to you guys, and thank you.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you so much.
To hear the full audio podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, TuneIn, Podbean, and other popular podcast platforms.